Another big story this past week, of course, you heard about Rush Limbaugh acknowledging that he is addicted to painkillers. And I certainly wouldn't be the first person to point out the hypocrisy of somebody who is all in favor of very strict sentences for people who commit offenses against the drug laws in this country, to then turn out to be somebody who is using drugs himself. But of course, he said the reason was that he had spinal surgery and he needed it for the pain. It was either that or submit to more surgery, which he did not want to do. Well, of course, there are a lot of people in this country who have wanted to use marijuana, for example, let alone heavier drugs, to try to relieve pain or some other medical condition. In her excellent article, The Invisible Hand is a Gentle Hand, Sharon Harris gave us several examples, and that article is also on the Radio Links page, and it is a fantastic article, quite lengthy, but it gives so many examples of the comparison between the compassionate free market and the iron fist of government. Here are just a few of them. James Burton is now living in the Netherlands because he was arrested for using and growing marijuana to try to treat what he has, which is a rare form of hereditary glaucoma. And his doctor even told him that marijuana was the only thing that could probably help him, and the doctor so testified at his trial, but he was sentenced to 1 year in a federal maximum security prison with no parole. And as soon as he got out, he took off for the Netherlands, and he had to because the government in the meantime had seized his house and his farm, a 90-acre farm, under asset forfeiture. And there was no defense he could raise against the seizure of his property. No defense witnesses were permitted at the hearing or anything else. Will Foster, a 38-year-old father of 3, grew marijuana in his basement to treat his severe rheumatoid arthritis. Police raided his home and found 70 marijuana plants. Because he was a first-time offender, the judge let him off with a 93-year sentence. Jimmy Montgomery of Oklahoma was sentenced to 10 years in prison for possession of 2 ounces of marijuana. That's the same weight that you find in the tobacco in 2 packs of cigarettes. Montgomery used the marijuana because he was a paraplegic and had been so for 20 years, and he found that marijuana was the only thing that relieved painful muscle spasms in his paralyzed legs. His harsh sentence came because he was convicted for both possession and intent to distribute. And that was based on the testimony of a cop who said he had never seen anyone with 2 ounces or more who didn't intend to distribute. Therefore, he was a dealer as well as a user and went to prison for 10 years. And the stories go on and on and on. Lonnie Lundy got a 10-year sentence, a life sentence for dealing drugs on the testimony of one witness and no evidence of any physical kind whatsoever. One witness who recanted his testimony afterward. Well, it goes on and on. So no matter what Rush Limbaugh's condition, he really can't say that he had an unusual circumstance, because Limbaugh has been preaching against relieving these people of these harsh sentences in the past. Now, Limbaugh isn't the first hypocrite in the war on drugs. When Lonnie Lundy was sentenced to a year in prison, his father wrote to his U.S. Senator, Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, a Republican, and pleaded with him to intervene and provide some help. But Senator Shelby wrote back and said, "Drug abuses and drug-related crimes are among the greatest ills that plague our nation. We must take a strong stand against drugs, and I support strict punishment for individuals involved in the possession or distribution of illegal drugs. While I understand your concerns about mandatory penalties for nonviolent offenders, I believe that our nation's drug problem is serious enough to warrant harsh sentences." Well, 5 months after writing that letter, Senator Shelby's 32-year-old son was arrested at the Atlanta airport with 13 grams of hashish in his possession. He pleaded guilty to a minor misdemeanor possession charge, paid fines totaling $860, performed 40 hours of community service, and was on probation for 1 year. He didn't spend a single hour in jail or prison. Representative Randy Cunningham of California, another Republican, needless to say, used to write articles for the San Diego Union and other places saying such things as, quote, "We must reverse the Clinton record, 80% cuts in the Office of National Drug Control Policy staff, fewer drug enforcement agents, reduced drug interdiction efforts, declining drug prosecutions, reduced mandatory minimum sentences for drug trafficking, and soft-on-crime liberal judges." Well, you can guess what happened next. His son was arrested, and the son was arrested for having 400 pounds of marijuana. 400 pounds! That does seem to be a little bit more than 2 ounces, so he must be a dealer. But of course, the father pleaded with the judge, saying, "Oh, he's a good boy. He has a good heart. He works hard. He's expressed to me he wants to go back to school. He's never been in trouble before." And so the judge took it all to heart. The son received a sentence of only 2.5 years, which is half the mandatory sentence, and then he was given the opportunity to reduce the sentence to 18 months by completing a drug rehabilitation program while in prison. In fact, the prosecutors had originally offered a sentence of only 14 months, but while the son was out on bail, he tested positive for cocaine 3 different times. Did he go to prison for life without parole? Of course not. Well, you can go on and on with this. Capitol Hill Blue, a Washington publication, found that 14 members of the current Congress, this was back in 1998, had been arrested on drug-related charges. Now, why don't you guess how many of them ever served a day in prison? Well, I think you get the point. The hypocrisy is tremendous, and I can almost guarantee you that Rush Limbaugh will never serve a day in prison for abusing drugs, as they say, for violating the drug laws, the very laws that he thinks need to be enforced in a more harsh way. The fact is there shouldn't be any drug laws, and when there were no drug laws, there was less drug abuse, less drug addiction, less violence, less drug dealers. There were no metal detectors in schools. There was no police corruption in the drug world. None of those things existed when there were no drug laws. And if we want a drug-free America, the first step would be to get rid of the drug laws. We'll be back in 2 minutes. This is Harry Browne.